Dobry večer. That's it for my check. So, first of all, I understand this is being recorded, and that's because some students are out protesting right now on Václavské náměstí. And I want to say to them, if they're watching this later, that I support the fact that they didn't come to this lecture in order to protest. Protest is good. Actions speak louder than words. So I hope you're watching this lecture right now on a rainy night with some popcorn and you're cozy at your house. Also, for those of you who are watching this later because it was a very beautiful day outside and you didn't feel like coming inside, I get that too. Good choice. You can watch it later. But for the rest of you, really glad you're here. Thank you very much. First thing is, I just want to make sure everybody knows that I'm not going to be giving a technical lecture here. If you came here to learn about the Unix operating system, or Linux, or cybersecurity, or any of the other fields I've worked in, this is not the lecture for you. You can leave now. Instead, what I want to do today is tell a story, and tell my story, because I am a very big believer that everybody's story is interesting if told well. Hopefully I'll do an okay job of telling my story, and that we can learn something from everybody's story. And so I'm going to tell mine, hopefully with some lessons learned in it, and maybe afterwards you can tell me your stories and what lessons you've learned. I see there's people of all ages in the room, so people will have more or less experience. And I think it's really important to listen to stories. And in particular, I think it's important to listen to women's stories. I read a book in 1985. It was by an English professor at Columbia University. And in real life, she was an English professor, Carolyn Halbrun, but she had another identity, which was Amanda Cross, and she was a mystery writer. So, but she didn't want her mystery writing, which is a very popular thing to do, to get in the way of her career as an intellectual English professor. And in her book, Writing a Woman's Life, she talked about the fact that women's biographies, if you pick up a book and read a story about a woman that's done something that's something of achievement, then you, male or female, but typically female, look at that book, look at that achievement and say, I can do that too. And when I think of when I was growing up, and I don't know if it's the case for you, if I went to my school library, there were only 2 biographies of women in that entire library. One was Amelia Earhart, who flew solo across the Atlantic, and one was Marie Curie. But there were really no other choices. So, unless I want to be a molecular biologist or a pilot, I didn't really have any models. And so that's why I believe in people telling their story, so you know what's possible and hopefully what you can do beyond that. So today is storytelling day. All right, let's see if I can figure out how to go down on this thing. Yes. All right. So a little bit first about me. I have a bachelor's and I have a master's in computer science from Columbia University in New York. I worked in tech for 30 years. In my introduction, it was said that I most recently was a VP in a software company, which is true, though not the VP of development. I was the VP, I was in what's called the C-suite, so I was in the executive suite running marketing. I'm also a mother, which I think is important to say. I'm going to talk about that at some point. Hi, kids. When I'm here, I'm also the wife of Andy Shapiro, who was the U.S. ambassador to the Czech Republic until January 20th, when President Trump came into office and told us we had to move out. I didn't really move out. I moved out of the house, but I didn't move out of the Czech Republic because I have children in school, and they should finish the school year, so I've stayed in any case with the kids. I also am a civic activist. I spend a lot of time and a lot of passion thinking about how we can get more civic engagement, what we can do in the world to make it better. I think that there's a huge role in activism to be played by technology. And I'll tell you this story. When I was in Columbia, somewhere in the middle of my time at Columbia, I was in a lecture hall like this. And this was in the early 1980s. And all of a sudden, my professor jumped up on the table. He jumped up, he stared at everybody in the classroom, and he said, you're computer science majors. Do you know who you're gonna be working for when you graduate? And I was thinking like, I haven't even thought of graduation, I haven't thought of my work, I don't know, I just kind of did this computer science thing. And everyone sort of stared at him like, why is this crazy professor standing on the table? And he said, you're all going to be working for the military, because those are the people who are hiring computer scientists. And that's it, that's your only choice. Do you want to be working for the military? This is our teacher. Now, let me just say, again, early 1980s, Cold War, whatever. First of all, the remarkable lack of vision of this guy, because of course, 10 years later, we're not working for the military, it's getting to be the tech boom, and there's plenty of jobs in computer science that have nothing to do with technology. But what was great about it was he was forcing us to think about the consequences of our work. And I think in tech, that's particularly so, because technology can be obviously used in the service of the good, or it can be used in the service of not the good. And so I tell you that in the spirit of saying, as a civic activist, when I think about what I want to do next, for example, I want to do technology in the spirit, in the service of civic engagement and good activism. Also, just for completeness, I'm a huge music fan. If you guys have some good bands to recommend to me, I'm all ears afterwards. And I have a really bad sweet tooth, which means I had about 3 kolaczkis this morning, and let's not talk about it. All right. So I'm going to tell you the history of how I got where I am and what I've learned along the way. So the first thing is, we'll start with high school, which is probably where a lot of you maybe first, actually, if you're young enough, you probably encountered technology on your telephone. But okay, in my day, there were a couple of Commodore computers. Does anybody know what a Commodore computer is, by the way? Okay, like nobody? One person? Commodore? All right, kind of, sort of. This was a very, very early computer. And there was one in my high school, and it was under lock and key, and it was only played with by a bunch of like really geeky boys. And they wouldn't let anybody in, and once in a while I'd kind of poke my head in and I'd say, what are you doing? And they'd be like, you wouldn't understand. One guy actually did try to explain it to me, but I just didn't understand the concept. And so I was intrigued, but I was intimidated, meaning I was sort of interested in this thing that I didn't understand, but I suspected that it wasn't for me and it was something I could never be part of, and it was something other. And I assumed that that would be the case forever. So I went through my high school years doing what normal people do in high school before there were computers, and I came to college thinking I was going to be a philosophy major. Now, let me tell you what was happening in the world of technology when I was in high school. The first thing to realize is that in 1977, now these are United States statistics, and we can talk about the Czech Republic, which are a little different. These were how many bachelors and masters and PhDs were given in that year. And you can see obviously the PhD, 19 PhDs in all of 1977 in computer science. That's a slightly better percentage, but not much, from 10 years earlier in '65. But by 1980, which is when I'm kind of finishing high school, it's gone up to 23%. I think the highest percentage of women graduates in tech actually in the United States was in 1985. It's gone down ever since. So just to sort of set the stage of what technology meant. But even so, even if you graduated with a degree in computer science at this point in time, you had a very difficult time to get a job, either because they didn't think a woman would be good enough or because they thought you would leave to have a baby. And when you were hired, your salary was much lower. And this actually remains true in terms of salary even now, interestingly enough. Now here, of course, under communism, there was much more equality with women and men in computer science. So I think I am very interested in a sort of a sociological point of view, which is how that, where you had parity and everybody understood that women could do the job, how it became such that it's gone down so tremendously here. I think women are maybe 12% now of the tech workforce, something pretty low. Where you had parity, at least in the United States, we never had it. We never had equality. You guys had equality, and now it's gone down, so okay. All right, so to continue my story, I set off for college, and as I said, I was going to be a philosophy major, but maybe because of the geeky boys on the Commodore computer in my high school, or I think more because typically you take 4 or 5 classes a semester at Columbia, and I had 4 lined up, but I needed a 5th, and I thought, okay, you know, I'll just take a computer science course because I shouldn't graduate college without knowing what a computer is. And I went and I took the class, and I thought it was fascinating. It was amazing, and I was really good at it. Turns out I was really good at something I'd never heard of before, and I got an A. And I thought, well, all right, the next semester, again, I needed a 5th course, maybe, maybe not. Why don't I take the next version? You know, I'll take computer science number 2. And I loved that. And suddenly, because I had the freedom to choose at age 19 what it was I could study, I found something that I really liked. And that's also a little different than the system here. You have to choose, I mean, you all know this, earlier. It's more difficult to change once you've elected your path. And I think for people who develop later an interest in computer science, that makes it more difficult to pick it up. Now, there are plenty of programs here in the country for people who have not gone to Czech Technical University and want to code later, and that's great. That's terrific, because there's so many opportunities to code. But at least in my day, that was not the case. So if I hadn't been fortunate enough to try and experiment and give something new a try, just the way I also, by the way, studied Mandarin Chinese, because I thought, okay, well, I'm in college, I'll never have a chance to learn Mandarin Chinese again, I'll study Mandarin Chinese. Okay, what have I done? My husband likes to joke that I'm the only person he knows who graduated with a computer science degree and Mandarin in 1985, and we do not own a yacht. In other words, we should be having like a, and I say, well, that joke used to work until you were the ambassador, and now nobody's really feeling sorry for you. So anyway, okay, so as I said, I studied computer science in college, and at that point, I was actually, I guess, part of a trend, because it turns out many women were taking on bachelors in computer science. Many, whatever, 36%, that's okay. I will say I surprised my family, who had never expected anybody in their family to be getting a computer science degree, and they wondered what on earth I would do with it, but it turned out to be a good choice. So what do I do next? I go to work for a record company. Makes no sense. I told you earlier I was a music fan. So I had the opportunity, as I was finishing college, to go work for Elektra Records. Elektra Records was like the boutique record label in the United States. It had great bands. It had Joni Mitchell, see I have her picture up there. It had this British guy who was popular then named Billy Bragg. Has anybody ever heard of Billy Bragg? Go listen to Billy Bragg, he's really good. He's a little bit leftist. If you don't want the leftist, maybe not Billy Bragg. Had a very great back catalog. And I went to work for Elektra, but I did not last at Elektra. And the main reason I did not last, and this is a really good life lesson for everybody who's going to have a job, is I was terrible and answering the phone and taking notes. Now, that sounds like the stupidest job in the world. Who can't answer the telephone and take notes? But I'm telling everybody this because no matter what job you do, whatever it is, like, do it well, because you're probably not going to be in that job very long. If you do something really well, they're going to move you and give you more responsibility, which is going to be the theme of this talk. But if you do something really dumb and do it really badly, then nobody's going to think you have any talent for the next thing that's more complicated. And so I was answering the phones in the video department. There were very early days of music videos, and I would write down in terrible handwriting that somebody named John Smith called, and then I'd give it to my boss, and she's like, "Who called?" And I'd say, "I don't know, John Smith or John Smythe," and she's like, "What's your problem? Your only job is to answer the phone and take a note." So I did not last there, but I think it was a really important lesson for me, and I'd share it with you because, had I done really well in that job, I could be running a record label today, but instead, I'm lucky enough to be here with you. Anyway, the good news is, though, I was good at computer science. So, AT&T Bell Laboratories, which was essentially the national laboratory of the United States. So we don't have a concept of a national lab where public funds go to invest in pure research. That does not happen in the United States. There's some public monies to invest in projects, but there's not like one lab. But AT&T Bell Labs was kind of like our national laboratory because AT&T Bell Labs was funded by the telephone. If you made a phone call, a little bit of the money that you paid for that phone call, every time you made a phone call, was put in Bell Labs. And since there was only one telephone company, AT&T, imagine the millions and millions of phone calls that were being made, and Bell Labs had a lot of money. And they had a lot of money to invest in research. So it was the prime place to get a job in science. And AT&T Bell Labs hired me out of school, which was awesome of them. And in fact, what was so great of them is that they said, "We like your bachelor's degree, but we think you'd be even better with a master's degree, so we're going to pay you your salary, and we're going to send you back to school for a year to get you a master's degree in computer science." So I did that, and I went back to graduate school while I never had to go into the office ever for AT&T. For the whole year, I just went to school, but they paid me a little check every month, which was pretty great of them, yay. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, probably fortunately, the phone company monopoly, which is what AT&T was not actually a really good concept for competition in the phone business. So the government finally came in and said, there can't be one phone company. We're breaking up the phone company into multiple ones that can compete, and that ended the real heyday of Bell Labs. But for me, they paid for my graduate school, so it was awesome. Now, AT&T had thousands and thousands and thousands of people, just really like it does today, thousands of people. And I went to work at a place with thousands of people. And here's what I got out of it. And this is probably the main thing I got out of it, which is I learned what best practices were. What is the best protocol, the best way to do a particular job? And there's two reasons why that's important. The first is, it's good to know the best way. Okay? The second reason is, you want to know the best way so that you know when you're breaking it. Because sometimes you want to break it. Sometimes you don't want that way. Sometimes that way is too expensive, or too slow, or inefficient, or whatever. But it's good to know what the best thing to do is, so that later, if you're not doing it, you kind of get what you're doing. So Bell Labs was a fantastic experience. Everybody got in the morning at 8:30 in the morning, and they left at 5 o'clock at night. It was not the culture of Silicon Valley, and I remember this is 1986, but it was a job, and everybody did their job. Now, interestingly about AT&T, this home of science in the United States, I should tell you, Bell Labs invented the laser. They invented the transistor, like the radio. They had many, many inventions, so it was a home of whatever. So you'd say, well, maybe it's a place full of men. It's, you know, it's a male place. It turns out that actually AT&T was very committed to hiring women. And that is an important lesson to think about for even now, as we were just talking about. Because if you actually make a corporate commitment to hire a diverse team, you can hire a diverse team. And if you, as a prospective employee, are considering where to go and you care about diversity, you can choose companies that are actually focusing on hiring diverse teams. So AT&T, for all of its largeness, and I was just a little tiny person in a very big place, was very good about women. And what I've noticed in my career, as a consequence, is that the larger the company that I've been to, the higher percentage of women have been there, but the least amount of responsibility women have had. And the smaller the company, like startups, which I've been a couple of, do you like my Barbie? CEO Barbie. There may be 1 to no women. I've been the one woman at a company, but you have a lot of responsibility. So sometimes this is a trade-off that you have to think about, and I'm happy to answer your questions about this later on. AT&T did a very good job of having panels where they would trot out, 10 women, and you could ask questions, can you have a child and work? What time do you go home at night? Blah, blah, blah. And some of them were dumb, and some of them were really good. But AT&T made an effort. And one story I'll tell about AT&T, just to show you that you don't know who you're sitting with and what they know and what they're thinking, is that they used to have one day a year at AT&T, which was called Affirmative Action Day. On Affirmative Action Day, they would bring out, everybody would come to a seminar to learn about how African Americans, Black Americans, are equal to, which I couldn't believe I was wasting a day hearing this. I mean, I don't know, I grew up in a very heterogeneous, I grew up downtown Chicago. My friends were all race, religions. Why am I wasting a day learning that Black Americans are the same as white Americans? One year, after Affirmative Action Day, which was a Friday, I drove with some of my colleagues from New York to North Carolina, because one of our colleagues was getting married in North Carolina. And we're driving down, me and these 2 colleagues, and I started saying something like, I cannot believe we had to have Affirmative Action Day again, what a waste of time. And the 2 people in the car with me who were driving down said, are you kidding? It was fascinating. I grew up in West Virginia. I did not know anybody Black, and I learned so much today. And I'm thinking like, really? But it made me appreciate what AT&T was doing. They understood their population. Not everybody is the same. They wanted to get everybody on the same page. So I have to salute AT&T for trying, even though I personally did not need the training. But you never know. Okay, next. I was getting a little bored at AT&T because it was a very giant company and everybody was checking in at 8 o'clock or 8:30 and checking out at 5. And the innovations were slow, and if you wanted to get something done, it was slow. It was like the government. It was very slow. Even though it was pleasant, it was slow. So I talked to my supervisor and I said, I'd like to go work for one of our customers. I'd like to just leave the country, leave the job, take a leave of absence, and go work. And to my surprise and delight, she said, okay. So I moved to Tel Aviv, and I went to work for a company called Magic. Totally random, okay? So everybody I knew was like, you're doing what? And I sublet my apartment in New York City, and I left all my stuff in there in a locked closet, and I went to work in Tel Aviv. It was supposed to be for 6 months, and it was so fascinating, and it was so interesting, I stayed for a year, and then they made me come back, or they were going to give away my job back at home. And what I loved about it was a totally different environment than AT&T. It was a fast-growing, hyper everywhere, wanted to have a flag in every country, software development house. They really appreciated somebody with my background, so that was fun. They sent me all over the world, and I came back to AT&T at the end of it with completely different perspective. And what I get from this experience is that, you need to have multiple experiences in your career, and everything you do, you're going to bring to your next job or bring back to your old job. But if you're only in the same place for the entire time, which is very unusual in tech now anyway, you are not doing yourself the best, and you're not doing your company the best. So you need that heterogeneity, and Magic gave it to me. It was a great experience, and I'm still friends with those people. So my lesson on that one of my top 10 list, learn how it's done somewhere else. Learn the best practices, then go somewhere else and see how they do it. Think about that in all the things you're doing. Okay, now, while I was at Magic, the reason I had to hurry back, because they weren't going to keep my job, is because in the meantime, Novell came knocking on AT&T's door, and they said, we want to buy some of what you have. Has anybody heard of Novell? Novell, it's so funny. So Novell in my day, and even now, was printing money. They sold a very simple thing that you all take for granted, which was new then, which is sharing a printer and sharing files. It used to be the case you had your computer, and you had to have your dedicated printer next to each. Believe it or not, this is true. So Novell invented the software to share a printer. You'd have one printer in your office, everybody could share it. Sounds crazy now, of course. That's what Novell did. And same thing with sharing files. They made zillions of dollars. They made a ton of money. Now, I, at AT&T, had been working in the Unix division. Okay, now, has everybody heard of Unix here? Tell me you've heard of Unix. Anybody? All right, one person. Unix was an operating system, and it was developed by Bell Labs, and I had been one of the developers on it. And Novell wanted to buy Unix from all the stuff that AT&T was doing. So AT&T said, okay, take it. And you can take these, all the people who worked on Unix, all these employees. So even though we stayed in the same building, we changed our flag outside. It suddenly said Novell, and I was now working for a company based in Utah. Utah is about as different from New York City as you can possibly imagine. And I was now going to Utah every month. On the one hand, Utah is beautiful, and sometimes I would see Robert Redford in his little, movie star hotel area that we would stay at. But Utah was a pretty big change. On the other hand, Novell was a little smaller than AT&T, and I started getting more responsibility where I was kind of running new products that Novell was going to develop. So I was one of the product managers of the new products. So that was a fun job. But Novell was an interesting and maybe not the best fit company for me. And the reason it was this is because their corporate culture was very different than me. There's nothing wrong with their corporate culture, but I had to identify what I was doing and what they were doing, and they were not the same. They were very straight. They did not want to deviate. They were very protective of their technology, which they should be. It made them a lot of money, but they had trouble letting go and knowing that at some point technology ages and you have to go forward. They weren't really so interested at the time of moving forward. It was a struggle of a time, and in the end, Novell decided that this Unix thing that they bought wasn't actually the right move. So now we're all at Novell, and we're working on this product that Novell doesn't want. So Novell says, okay, I want to sell Unix. Who's going to buy Unix? And two companies raised their hands. Hewlett-Packard, HP, which I'm sure you've all heard of, and a little tiny company in Santa Cruz, California, called SCO. Now, has anybody ever heard of Santa Cruz? Santa Cruz is really cool. Santa Cruz is on the coast of California. It's about an hour and a half south of San Francisco. Santa Cruz has one of the University of California campuses there, and the name of the team at UCSC are the Banana Slugs, just to sort of show you that they're hippies, they're very crunchy, they're very groovy, they're very out there. And they were interested, and SEO had a little kind of mini Unix product. So they were interested in getting the big Unix, the Bell Labs Unix that Novell owned. In the meantime, Hewlett-Packard, we know, very buttoned up, very straight-laced company, wanted it too. So Novell kind of cut a deal where they were going to sell the license and part of it to SEO, but give HP the rights to do something else, and everybody would kind of share between HP and SEO. So that's fine, Novell got rid of it. But then what happened to the people? So here's where it gets interesting. So some people that were working at Novell on Unix, HP wanted to hire. And some people, this Santa Cruz called SEO wanted to hire. There's a few of us, we had job offers from both companies, and I was one of the people. So I had a job offer from HP, a job offer from SEO. And I really didn't know what to do. And so I called my family, and they said, oh, please, who's ever heard of SEO? You know, HP all the way, HP, you can retire at HP. And I called a guy I know who's a very well-known, he's written many books, kind of strategic planner, thinker, and he was like, HP is one of the best companies in America, you clearly have to go to HP. And so right before I was saying yes to HP, they made me take a drug test, and I passed. But, you know, I thought, okay, they're making me take a drug test, whereas SEO is basically giving out drugs. HP was kind of making you take a drug test. Not quite. I'm on video, just kidding, SEO. Anyway, so, you know, I took the advice of everybody, and I said yes to HP. And I went home the night I said yes to HP, and I thought, this is just the wrong decision. I've been at HP essentially because I was at AT&T. I've been at a very big company. I understand big companies. I understand how they operate. I had that experience at Magic in Tel Aviv, which I liked. It was kind of young and fast. The guy from SEO, the CEO of SEO, really appealed to me. He was casual and interesting, and he's like, you know, you got to come here. And I came home and I felt terrible that I had told HP yes and I had turned down the SEO offer. So the next morning, I got up and I called the SEO people and I said, is it too late? Like, did you hire somebody else? And they said, no, we'll still take you. And then I called the HP people and I said, you know, would you hate me if I now said no? And they were like, you know, who are you, loser? No. So I changed my mind. And I will tell you, that was one of the best decisions of my life. Because within a year, everybody I knew at HP, like my friend group, people who were kind of like me, all of them had left HP, and I was running a $200 million business. So what I say to you about that lesson is that take the job you're interested in, not the company. Everybody told me the SEO, they have hot tub jacuzzis in their backyard, they're banana slugs, they're in Santa Cruz, HP, it's the company. But I thought I was just gonna be a little person in a wheel. And at SEO, I knew I would have a big chance, and I was right. And I share that experience with you about Novell and the corporate culture and about taking the job, not the company, because if you take a job that you love and you get something out of it, that is worth most anything in the world. So, okay, onward. After about, I would say 5 years maybe at SEO, 4 or 5 years, the Unix business was beginning to suffer because Linux, which was kind of like a free version that was similar to Unix, was coming on the scene. And we realized at SEO that at some point in our future, this cash cow that we had, this Unix business, was not going to be worth as much as it was right now. And I told you it was about a $200 million business. $199 million of it was the Unix operating system, and like $1 million of it was this little tiny product we had called Tarantella. And Tarantella was kind of like I don't know if you know Citrix. It was like a remote desktop, basically. It was this kind of, you might think of it as a screen scraper, I don't know, whatever. Anyway, so same thing again, you have a choice. Do you want to stay with SEO or go for the little thing? And the CEO that I mentioned that I had liked was going to take over Tarantella. And I said, okay, you know what, I'm gonna take this entrepreneurial risk, and I'm gonna go for this weird $1 million Tarantella spider company. By the way, I have like 100 mugs that have this Tarantella logo on it. If anybody wants a mug, see me later. I'd like to get rid of them. So I took the risk of going to Tarantella. Now, the question is, how did that work out? So I will say we did successfully sell Tarantella a couple years later to Sun Microsystems, and ultimately Oracle bought Sun Microsystems. I don't know if you've even heard of these companies. So, you know, it wasn't a great exit, maybe, I can't remember, $20, $25 million sale. But it was a fantastic thing again, because as you remember, my early pyramid of the companies get smaller, but your responsibility goes up. So in this job, I had a very influential role managing all the analysts that were going to comment on our product and doing product marketing. And I felt that it was worth taking the chance, even though SEO kind of got sold to somebody else and is sort of still in existence, that for me, being able to do something that I'd never done before was worth the change. And, you know, and we had an okay exit. Now, what happens here? What happens here is that I get pregnant. And this is a really important moment that is, you know, even men, I want men to listen here, but, you know, women you will understand, which is, you know, what do you do at this point? In the United States, it's a lot easier, I would claim, than here. In the United States, I had a California-based, because I was working in Silicon Valley, even though I was commuting, I had a California-based maternity leave, which was very generous for the United States, which was 6 months. I know here it's much longer, and in some ways better, but obviously in some ways an issue. So I had one baby while I was at Tarantella, and I took my 6-month leave, and I came back, and it was a little bit difficult to come back. The company was moving quickly, and I was away. And then I had my second child, and I came back just as we were selling the company to Sun. And so when I had my second child, and after this deal was closed, a board member of Tarantella called me up and said, I'd like you to come, you know, work for me. I have a startup that I'm doing in computer security, which was not my field. We'll talk about that in a minute. And I said, no, I have been working, you've heard my story, I've been working since the day I, you know, finished college, and I have 2 young children, and I can't work right now, I need a break. And he said, well, you know, take a break for a couple days and call me. It's like, okay. And about a week or so later, he sent somebody, a friend of his, to come take me to dinner in New York and sit me down and, you know, say you have to come work for this company. And so I felt pressure, and I said, okay. And I took a job, we'll talk about this, as a contractor for a little bit, and ultimately converted into being a full-time employee, and which gave me, I would say in total, about maybe 4.5 weeks between the time we had closed the Tarantella sale till working again, which is not a lot of time. On the other hand, I think if I had taken off vast quantities of time, it may have been hard to reintegrate. So we can all discuss this, but in every one of your stories here, women in this room, there will be this will happen. This will be a thing that will happen. And it's, you know, really good to think about what you might want in advance, and then compare it to how you're feeling when it's actually happening, because you can never obviously anticipate what it's like to have a child and who's going to help you. Will your partner help you or not? You know, my sister gave me the best advice I've ever had about this, which she said, have all the help you can afford. I thought, thanks very much. Yeah, great. But I thought it was actually solid advice. But there will be this moment, so worth talking about. Anyway, so have a baby, do it. Don't not do it. Let's put it that way. Go for it. Okay, so these are some statistics I wanted to just bring up, because these are Czech statistics. And and these are recent statistics, so I just think it's worth mentioning. Here in this country, only half of the mothers who go on maternity leave ever return to their old workplace. And unlike other companies, unlike other countries, I found this second statistic very telling. A very tiny percentage of people here right now work part-time or have flexible hours. Now, I don't know if the gig economy will be kind of changing these numbers over time, but this is a very telling statistic for people who are interested ultimately in having children. So I throw that at you. And the final one, that this country has one of the highest unemployment rates of mothers in the whole of the EU. So we need to figure that out here. We need to figure that out. One thing that I sort of like, I was talking to a woman who's at Vodafone, and one of the things they've started here is that they allow mothers to come back to work, they invite mothers to come back to work after, let's say, a year, and they pay them for the 40-hour week, for the full work week, but they only make them work like 30 hours. So they keep them in the system and working and happy and able to integrate, but give them more free time, which I think is actually a really nice solution. All right, we're done with that. Okay, so I told you I had my little tiny break after the sale of Tarantella, and then I was persuaded to join Catbird. Now, in all of the jobs I've told you about, with the exception of the record business job, they were all infrastructure software jobs. Catbird did computer security. I did not know anything about computer security. I mean, I knew what an operating system did in terms of computer security, but I didn't know about network security, which is what Catbird is. And that's why I did it. That's why I did it. Because in technology, and you guys know this, one of the greatest things about our jobs, about our field, is that it doesn't stay the same. Right? The stuff you learned your first year here will be different than the stuff you're learning your last year, and will be guaranteed different than what the next group of people coming in their first year is. Technology changes. So I was very mindful, as I recommend you be, about taking a job I didn't know how to do, because I wanted to be able to learn something else, something new. And that's my piece of advice about Catbird. Also, Catbird, it was an interesting situation. It was a turnaround. It was in a business kind of like cloud-based security, but before there was a cloud, before we called it that. And we came in and we basically had to fire most of the staff, unfortunately, and start the company over. And it took us, I would say, a year and a half, a long time, to figure out what it is that the company actually did. Like, what did we have? What technology? What was our intellectual property that made a big difference? That's a very interesting exercise. What do we have? What are we doing? What's interesting? And we figured it out, and we wound up in a very new space, cloud security, which was now emerging, and we built a very big brand for ourselves. Catbird, by the way, was just sold about 2 weeks ago. So, couple of notes I'd like to say about Catbird. As I said, take a job you don't know how to do. Now, that was a good thing about Catbird. The other good thing about Catbird that I would recommend to everybody that is not intuitive is that when you're hiring, or when you're looking for a job, always hire the person who wants to take your job. Always hire the person who wants to take your job, because they're going to do a really good job, because they want your job. So now you've got somebody working for you who's going to do an excellent job, and you get to do something else, because that's kind of the point anyway. You're going to do your job, but you've done it already. Now you want to go do something else. So hire somebody who can do your job for you, do it well, you'll supervise, and then you can keep doing this. You can keep learning and keep moving on. Remember this. Think about it when you call me in 10 years and tell me if you're doing this. On the other hand, Catbird was quite small. And while I really loved my colleagues and I loved the management, there was a long period of time where I was the only female. And you would think that that doesn't matter if you're a strong, self-possessed person. But it turns out it does matter a little bit. And we can talk about it as a general matter, why diversity and gender inclusiveness matters in terms of corporate success. But in the case of Catbird, I'll illustrate it with this story, which is, I was in a meeting, And so at this point, I'm the VP of marketing at this point in this story. I was at a meeting, and I was sitting around with all the guys who are running the company and me, and I'm helping to run this company too. And one of the people who I liked very much in the company, one of the guys, turned to me in this meeting, and he said, "You know, Tamar, you're not that warm and fuzzy." And I was thinking, like, is my job to be warm and fuzzy? Actually, my job is to like run the marketing of this company, and I've just done a really successful launch where we had naked men running outside the San Francisco Moscone Convention Center, and we got tons of attention for our tiny little company, and like, you're telling me I'm not warm and fuzzy? Like, what? Would you say that to a man? You know, I was like, ugh! But I kept my cool, but I thought, like, I don't think he meant anything bad by it. You know, I think he was maybe it was even a compliment, kind of like, you know, you're tough. But I think he was sort of saying, you're not that likable right now. I think he was saying you're not that likable, but he was looking for me to be like a mother. He was looking to be warm and fuzzy. And you know, if you ask my children, I'm pretty warm and fuzzy. They would call me mushy. But in my office situation, I'm not warm and fuzzy. And this is a very recent story. I mean, I've been here for 3 years, so this story is 4 or 5 years old, but this is modern time story. So this happens, and you know, one of the best ways to have this not happen is to choose a company that you're not the only female in. And then people won't stand for that. So heads up on that. Okay, so then that sort of ends that phase of my technology career, because President Obama then decides to announce that my husband's been nominated to be the ambassador to the Czech Republic. So unfortunately, as a State Department spouse, you can't work for any company that could potentially have federal contracts. And of course, every technology company wants a federal contract, like who doesn't? So that made me unable to work. Do you think my husband owes me? Yes, yes. So at that point, though, you have to pivot. Now in tech, as we know, only 10% of the startups actually ever make it. And even in the 10% of startups that do make it, it's almost certain that the company started out doing something different that they wound up being successful with. There's probably been 2 or 3 pivots in there, 2 or 3 turns, 2 or 3 changes where you get to do something new. And so the State Department opportunity was a pivot for me, obviously, but I think something that I'm lucky to have had. I could have sat there and been angry or quiet, but instead I came here and I started working with voluntarily, no payment, with organizations that are doing good work with getting young people involved in science and technology careers and getting women in technology careers. And one of the things that I think our embassy should be the most proud of is that we introduced Chiquitas, which is a wonderful Czech-based organization that teaches women how to code. We introduced them to Google here, and Chiquitas was just about 2 weeks ago awarded. They're the first organization in the Czech Republic to have been awarded a Google.org grant, which is a large sum of money that the Google Foundation gives to emerging good social technology ventures. And Chiquitas, which trains women and refugees to code, is a Google.org recipient. And that's the work that's been done by Embassy Prague as a pivot from, you know, I can't collect my paycheck anymore. All right, so I just want to sort of, that's my story. That's how I got here with you today. I want to just close with a couple of statistics that I thought would be interesting for everybody in light of what I've shared. And, you know, think about some thoughts about what we can do about it. So look at that. Look at these statistics on the wall. You can read them. With each level of management, women decline. In many, many universities, the number of women students is about 50-50 in terms of engineering. But by the time it gets to these companies, it's only about 12%. That's crazy. That's crazy and unnecessary. We have to fix that. So you can see that. So they're not advancing. We'll talk about why they're not. In terms of why we should care, why should we care? Why should we care? There's obviously the basic level of fairness. We care because we want to be fair. And why is it that half the graduates from your class, when you graduate, only 12% of the female graduates will get to a level of responsibility like an executive level, and far more men. We should care because it's not fair. But there's another reason we should care. And there's another reason we can persuade people to care. And that's because it turns out that companies with greater diversity simply do better. This has been proven time and time again. I first got this statistic from a woman who is a venture capitalist who only invests in female-funded companies. And I thought, female-run companies. And I thought, well, what's that niche? And she told me she was getting 65% better returns than in her old. And I thought, well, you must be some outlier statistic. And then over and over again, I've seen the statistics kind of converge on about a third more. So companies that have 2 or more female directors, or at least high-level people, high-level positions, just perform better. And there's really good reason. It's not arbitrary. There's good reason for this. Think about just in terms of marketing. You know, there's a very famous Microsoft failure from whatever, 10 years ago, of a little bot assistant. I don't know if you ever saw that. It was like a little happy guy who showed up on the bottom of the screen and started talking to you if you were pausing and didn't know how to do Word or Outlook or whatever. And it turns out it was designed by a group of guys, and the face and the weirdness like totally creeped out women. Women hated this thing. They had never done any test marketing on women. It just never occurred to the team. They just didn't do a focus group on women, and there were no women on the team. And they had to kill. It was a $1 zillion project. They had to kill it. So there's just like a very good business reason to think about getting the diverse culture of people who are going to use your product to be involved in the product development. I also saw a statistic, which is not on here, that actually angel capital will let me say this again. Companies with 2 or more founders tend to do better than companies with a single founder, and women, when they found companies, tend to do it in teams, and so they're more likely to get angel funding. So there's also just some basic, good drivers for trying to get seed money for your idea by being a diverse team. There's another reason that I think has an economic driver here, which is the overemployment in tech. And this is true in this country and the United States. There are way more jobs in tech right now than people to fill them. I think everybody knows this. By some estimates, you can see in 2020 there'll be 1.4 million extra jobs. So if you're leaving 50% of your workforce out, just as a business, you're the head of the company, you might be a guy, but if you can't draw from the biggest pool you can to hire in your jobs, that's terrible economics. I was mentoring a student last year, a graduate from here, and she was working at a company, and they wanted to expand. They were doing well, and they wanted to expand, and they couldn't hire, and so they couldn't expand. I mean, this is crazy. This is a foundational thing. You want to scale out your business, you're doing well, and you can't find people to hire. That, I think, more than anything, will drive the corporate culture and the industry and the government to get invested in making sure women get into technology and succeed. In terms of, these are some funny statistics that I like to point out. This first bar graph, the top bar graph, it's hard to read here, but it's basically, there's an entrepreneurship index that gets published for every country about where different countries perform in certain areas of entrepreneurship culture. And the Czech Republic gets the lowest score in terms of being able to recognize an entrepreneurship opportunity and the highest score in childcare. So, it's interesting, where you want to put your emphasis. Sometimes they're going to be at odds with each other, but I'm all for childcare, but if it's putting together your opportunity, if it's stopping your opportunity, you have to be careful. And here, in terms of female entrepreneurship index, you can see that the Czech Republic is 17 out of the 20 out of this, so I don't know. That's okay, but I will say that I have been very impressed by the female entrepreneurs that I have met here. I do some work with them. I do some digital academy with Google with them to train them on digital skills, and there's a lot of great ideas and great enthusiasm, so I'm super optimistic about the female entrepreneurs in the country. So we just have to make sure that we give them all the support we can with whatever regulations and laws and et cetera can make it work for them. So finally, like what's holding us back? I'm nominating here 5 things, and I think they're all worth thinking about. The first one is just stereotypes. The culture has stereotypes about women in technology. You can see it by this comic. If a man doesn't do something well, he sucks at math. But if a girl doesn't solve the problem, then girls in general suck at math. Right? It's never individual. And I think we need to think about, and everybody should look in their heart and think about what they're doing to get rid of those stereotypes. There's also a very big confidence gap. This is talked about a lot in the literature, and this starts really in middle school, so what I would call like age 10, 11, where girls start telling themselves that they're not good enough in science and technology, and then they just tell themselves that enough, and they believe that. There's actually sort of an interesting corollary I read to this recently, which it turns out that guys who are good in math and science tend to be good at math and science and not necessarily good at literature, history, social studies. Girls who are good at math and science tend to also be good in humanities. And so why this is interesting is it turns out people were wondering, well, why have those girls who are good at math and science not wound up in math and science careers? And that's because they had other options. They could have become journalists or writers, whereas the boys, not so much. If you've been a good boy at math, you may not have been good. I don't know how to prove that, but that's a study I read recently I thought was kind of interesting. Lack of role models, we talked about in the beginning, telling your story. So if there's not a lot of stories to hear in tech, you may not believe that you can do it. Personal concerns. And then, of course, the sexism, within the academy. I mean, I'm sure you all remember Tim Hunt. If you haven't seen the memes about Tim Hunt, when you walk out of here, go put hashtag distractingly sexy into your Twitter feed, and you will laugh. Because with the women who responded, Tim Hunt was a Nobel Prize winner and said he can't go in a lab with women because they're distractingly sexy. And so women who are like, taking shit out of, sewers to measure the pH balance, put up a picture saying, I'm distractingly sexy. It's very funny. So we have to get rid of that stuff too. So what can we do about it? This is my sort of optimistic slide. There's a lot we can do about it. So one of the things that we were talking about earlier before I started was if you affirmatively care about fixing this, you can fix it. So there are a number of Silicon Valley companies who have really been thinking about this issue, and they have had goals that they've set for how many women hires, how many women promotions, and then they publicize them. So part of this stuff is that you can't monitor your success if you're not measuring anything. And being transparent is obviously the best way to make sure you're adhering to it. So there's a whole bunch of companies, you can go on the Anita Borg Institute site, who have signed up for certain goals even if they haven't reached them. They're willing to be public that they haven't reached them, and they're kind of shaming other Silicon Valley companies into publicizing their goals and whether or not they reach them. And so we're trying to sort of build this culture of people saying what they want to get in terms of women participation and leadership, and then working on ways to get there. The woman who runs Harvey Mudd College, so Harvey Mudd College, we were talking about earlier, is one of the best engineering colleges in the United States. It's in San Diego. They hired a woman to run the college a number of years ago, and she made it her affirmative goal to hire and train and support women engineers, and now that goal is at about 50-50 parity, which is an amazing thing because somebody actually cared about it. So if you care about it, you can do it. In terms of what you can ask for when you're looking for work or when you're building your own companies here, you obviously want to build a climate where diversity, gender, race, I know there's not so much race diversity here, but race, whatever diversity, that will make a better culture for you, and you'll be able to recruit more. So for the companies that have big open jobs and can't hire, they should ask themselves, maybe women don't want to work there. Mentoring programs are really big. So there's one I like here, if you haven't been involved with it, called Odyssey. It's run Czech-based, and it's now expanded to the EU. They do a great job for mentoring women leaders to become even better leaders. It's a fantastic organization. I mentioned to you, Chiquita's trying to fill gaps where women need more training or support and are not getting it to help them move to the next step. So these are all things up here, we don't have to go through the list in an exhaustive way, which I believe have been effective when managers, when companies, even universities have been thinking about them, they get the job done. So that's it, that's my story. It's been a pleasure for me to talk to you. It's been a pleasure for me to be spending time in the Czech Republic for the last 3 years and meeting people like you. I really have loved my time here. I've loved seeing how exciting and developing the country is in terms of entrepreneurship. I think Brno, Prague has a chance to really build a Silicon Valley culture. I've seen it happen even in the time I've been here. I think, being able to take risks and not be afraid to fail and bring everybody involved, I think it's just a great opportunity for the country, and I'm so happy for you, and I thank you for your time.